Hello, this is Paul Harris, Editor Americas at Mining Journal, and today I'm joined by Daniel Earle, President and CEO of Solaris Resources, to talk about copper exploration and its exciting Warintza project in Ecuador. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Solaris has been in drilling mode for several months now, and you've been hitting your Warintza Central property pretty hard and expanding that with great results. Yet today, but today, should I say, you announced your first drill results from the Warintza East part of the property. Tell us about the intercept you released today and what that means for the project.
Yeah, well, I'll just frame it for you in terms of our, strategic objectives as a company. From the beginning of this company, we had a view that this could be the best development copper asset available globally going into this powerful structural bull market that we have before us. And so the two key objectives were to define at Warintza Central, where there was an existing resource estimate based on historical drilling, very shallow drilling just in the center of the deposit, to expand that zone into a billion-ton resource. And so we set out in broad strokes what that would look like. That's roughly a 1 kilometer strike length drilled down to a kilometer depth. So to define a billion-ton resource at Warintza Central, a high overall grade with the highest grades at surface, such that you could form a high grade starter pit and really drive robust economics in terms of high grades in those early years of the mine life. So that would be number one. And then the second part of it would be demonstrating that beyond Warintza Central, you have multiple times growth potential. And to do this, we're engaged in discovery drilling. So we made a discovery at Warintza West, for example, in February, and now just this morning we've announced a discovery at Warintza East. These are two of the targets within the Warintza cluster of porphyries, or porphyry targets, where we've got a total of 5 targets across something like a 7 kilometer strike length and 5 kilometers north to south. So a very large target area within which we're working and trying to achieve these objectives.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about this maiden hole into Warintza East. It was only a partial hole, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, we just released the assays that we have available, which are representing the first 320 meters of drill core from what was eventually more than a 1,200-meter hole. So the balance of the assays will report as soon as they're available. Those will be in the coming weeks, through August and possibly even into early September. And so the first 320 meters, this is a target that was completely undrilled. The hole was collared something like 1,300 meters beyond the eastern extent of drilling at Warintza Central. And Warintza Central, it's important to understand, itself is growing. So we spoke about that objective of drilling off 1 billion tons, which would be roughly 1 kilometer strike length down to 1 kilometer depth of Central. In our most recent drill results from Central, we've actually been extending beyond those dimensions to the east. So in a press release that was released in May, we went from 1,000 meters to 1,100 meters at Warintza Central. This was in hole 21, which cut something like a kilometer of 0.7% copper equivalent from surface. And then in a release in July, hole 26 extended that 1,100 meters out to 1,250 meters in another kilometer-long interval of something like 0.6 copper equivalent from surface. So Central itself was growing to the east, which was encouraging about the potential of Warintza East. Now we've got the first part of the first hole that's ever been drilled into Warintza East and released that to the market. And so the first part of that hole, the first 320 meters, graded 0.46% copper equivalent. Okay, and within that, we had a higher grade interval of 54 meters of 0.7 copper equivalent. Still to come is the balance of the hole. So this is in total more than a 1,200-meter hole, for which we'll have assays in the coming weeks.
Okay, and that equivalent, there's obviously copper there, but you've also got molybdenum and gold there. Do you know, or can you say if that whole hole was mineralized, or won't you know until the assays come back?
Well, we've got to see the assays. It wouldn't be fair to me for me to comment on the visual. We'll just wait until the assays come back. But look, the The situation is that every single hole that's been drilled within this Warintza cluster of porphyries, whether it's at Central, the lone hole that we drilled at West, or now this single hole for which we have partial assays at Warintza East, every single hole has been well mineralized. So it's just an incredibly robust and large system, and so we're optimistic about any of the drilling that we would do within this cluster of porphyries.
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned how the drilling at Warintza Central has continued to expand beyond what you thought its envelope would be. And I guess you're now going to start expanding out to Warintza East, and you talked about filling the gap between Warintza Central and Warintza East. And you also mentioned you've got some other porphyry targets to attack with the drills for the first time, such as Warintza South and Yawi. What's the sort of the more regional drilling plan that's going to evolve over the next few months?
Yeah, so obviously the key strategy objective is the drilling at Warintza Central and defining that resource in line with the targets that I suggested. So that's the bulk of our effort there. We've gone beyond that kilometer kind of strike length that we had initially set out as a target, and so that means that more drilling now needs to be done. So that's the focus of our efforts, with a view that we could have a resource published certainly in Q4, for the Warintza Central zone on its own. And then the other part of the strategy is just demonstrating the discovery potential around that. So we've made the discovery at Warintza West. We've now made and announced the upper part of a discovery at Warintza East. Of the two, Warintza East is more impactful for us. If you think about the pure geometry, and you alluded to this in your comments about a gap between Central and East. So this first hole at Warintza East is something like a 1,300 meter step out to the east of the easternmost drilling at Warintza Central. The pit shell, if you imagine a pit shell with let's say 45-degree slopes, taking in the full vertical of the drilling that we have at Warintza Central, which runs down beyond a kilometer. The deepest holes are still mineralized beyond 1,200 meters. If you imagine what a pit shell would look like, the eastern slope of that pit shell would run something like a kilometer out towards Warintza East. So out to the east from Warintza Central towards Warintza East. And so this drill hole would just be a few hundred meters beyond that pit shell. And so the likelihood is if you were to draw a new pit around this discovery at Warintza East, it would join with the Warintza Central pit. And so effectively what you'd have is a super pit situation where you've got one large pit taking in what are currently two separate deposits. And that just means that everything between the two is that much more important in terms of its impact on eventual in-pit resources and a mine plan for this deposit. So Warintza East is important in a way that Warintza West, being a separate deposit and eventually a separate pit shell, is not. So that's high impact drilling for us. There are two other very important targets that we have. These are not going to be part of this pit development that we have at Central and possibly at East. These are separate targets, but by virtue of their size, they become very, very important. So Warintza South, for example, is a multi-kilometer target, suggestive of multi-billion ton potential if the results confirm the geochemistry that we see at surface, which is similar to the other targets, the geophysical anomaly that we see in the subsurface, which again is similar to these other targets. And then also Yawi, which is our newest target. It wasn't part of the original target set that we saw here. It was actually a discovery purely from geophysics with no sampling on surface above that or within that target area. We since, when we made the geophysical discovery, have come in and added geochemical data over the northern part of that anomaly. And it's suggesting a similar sort of signature as these other targets. And we're now extending that sampling down to cover the southern part of the target. But what you have there, again, like with Warintza South, at Yawi, you've got a multi-kilometer target there, which has got an identical signature to these other targets, and strongly encouraging as to the discovery potential. So those will be two other really critical targets that we'll be looking forward to drilling in the coming months as part of this regional program.
To follow up on your comments about the impact of Warintza East, effectively that could greatly reduce the stripping ratio, and that has all sorts of economic implications. And so I guess with a resource on Warintza Central coming out towards the end of the year, and presumably a few holes between the two deposits, the two areas in the intervening time, people will be able to start to piece in what a potential pit shell could look like and what the mineralization within that could look like.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Paul, and that's an astute point. So once you've defined a pit shell, you have blocks within that pit shell which will form part of the resource. They'll either be categorized resource blocks, indicated or inferred in our case, or they'll be defined waste blocks. So there's drilling that informs those blocks and they're defined as waste, or they'll be unclassified waste blocks. So blocks that don't have any drilling information kind of informing them, that are just unclassified. So that'll all go within a pit shell. And the existing pit shell, as I said, for Warintza Central, it extends out into that area quite close to Warintza East. So any drilling, the drilling at Warintza East and then the drilling between Warintza East and Central is all going to be very important with respect to the categorization of those blocks, which will naturally fit within that pit shell. So it's very high impact from that perspective.
Yeah, it sounds like almost £3, so to speak. But perhaps we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves there. But I imagine there's going to be a lot of eyes on that maiden resource, the resource update towards the end of the year. While I have you, Daniel, I'd just like to sort of ask you a more sort of general question. Solaris has projects in Ecuador, obviously, but also in Peru and Chile. The Latin American region's seen quite a bit of political change this year. What's your view on some of the changes that are occurring across the hemisphere?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most important political developments are the ones in Ecuador itself, and so we've come through the election in April. The country has elected a Guillermo Lasso, who's a true conservative. He's oriented towards market economy and growth through the private sector, and he's importantly viewing the natural resource opportunities within the country as a key kind of objective in terms of growth. And so this is the mining sector, obviously, where he's come out and said that he wants to see the mining sector grow in Ecuador to become a rival for regional peers like Peru and Chile, which are, by the way, the numbers 2 and 1 producers globally with respect to copper. And he wants to see this accelerated through foreign direct investment. And certainly the minister that he's appointed has echoed those statements and said that this decade in which we find ourselves at the moment will be a decade for mining in Ecuador. And so from 2020 to 2030, they're looking for billions of dollars of investment into the mining sector in Ecuador and billions of dollars of tax and royalty revenue to be generated by this sector to fund the broader kind of political objectives of this government. So that's the most important to us. We do have projects also in Chile and Peru. Unfortunately, those countries have gone in the opposite direction. So Peru, you will have seen that Pedro Castillo was declared president-elect just today. So Pedro Castillo is a socialist. He's taken a very dim view of kind of the mining sector in the country and what it's contributed or hasn't contributed to the overall development of that country and its economy and social objectives and so on. And so he's discussed with his economic advisor Franke that a need for renegotiations of tax stability agreements, higher resource rents through taxes and royalties, and a bunch of other policies that could certainly be adverse to the mining sector. And so this will have a chilling effect on the appetite for investment with respect to this country. And this is of critical importance to the copper industry because of the growth potential that was assumed would be delivered and realized from Peru. So something like 1.5 million tons per annum of growth is baked into the cake of global supply demand forecasts for Peru across this decade. This is projects like Quellaveco, Tia Maria, Michiquille, Los Chances, La Granja, and so on and so forth. So this is this is very, very, very troubling. And then also likewise in Chile, you have a similar sort of shift to the left, but on a different time scale. So the presidential elections and the congressional elections in Chile will take place in November. But certainly, if you look at the polling, it's suggesting that the kind of shift to the left that we saw reflected in the results of the Constituent Assembly election in May, and the kind of dialogue around the Glacier Bill about increased royalties and taxes in that country is also reflected in the presidential polling, where you've got the front runner now, Daniel Earle, a self-avowed communist, talking about partial nationalizations of assets, much higher taxes, and an overall kind of adverse policy direction in that country. So these are, again, the number one in the case of Chile and number two producer in the case of Peru, accounting for close to 40% of current supply and at least an equal share of the growth, which is assumed in supply-demand forecasts for the future. So it's really, really causing a kind of a shakeup about the assumptions around future supply in these jurisdictions.
Well, thank you for that overview and summary, Daniel. It sounds like Ecuador has a real opportunity before it, over and above the actual geology it has. It's got a market conducive for higher copper prices. It's got perhaps issues with its main competitors. So there's a real opportunity for Lasso and Ecuador to take advantage of.
This is exactly the case. I mean, this is the opportunity for the country to deliver an economic miracle through the investment, the growth, job growth, economic growth, growth in the tax base, growth in infrastructure, and all of this concentrated in the regions that most desperately need this kind of development. The hinterlands of the country, far removed from the coastal exporting regions where you've seen, all the big economic growth in the major cities and so on. So this is, it couldn't be more welcome for the country, but it's up to the government, it's up to Congress, and it's up to the mining companies to all work together in a way in which this this kind of potential can be realized.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, unfortunately, Daniel, that's all we have time for today. So I'd like to say thank you to Daniel Earle of Solaris Resources for joining me, and stay tuned for more from Mining Journal.